I'm going to continue talking about abortion, including miscarriage and reproductive rights and fertility journeys. If that's not the sermon you need to hear today in this moment for any reason, we have lots going on outside. I invite you to take care of yourselves and go for a walk if that's what you need to do in this moment. I was humbled recently. One of the kids in our congregation asked me a couple weeks ago if I was going to be the new B'nai Mitzvah director. And I said no. She said, why not? I said, well, I have a job already. And she said, doing what? It's a classic trope, I'm sure not here in this community of Bethel, but other shuls, other communities have this joke, not joke. No one really knows what the rabbi does Sunday to Friday, right? He gives the sermon Saturday morning, sure, and then maybe I run into him at the JCC or at Costco once or twice, but what does the rabbi do during the week? And so this week I've been thinking about what my job is. Rabbi Davis and I spoke about it at some length in my 6-month review recently. Attending morning minyan, writing sermons, doing funerals, sitting with mourners, teaching Heschel and moot court classes and learning Talmud. The list does go on, and despite what some of the local youth might think, I'm actually pretty busy day to day. It might be because I'm still new at this work, that I felt a little defensive. Like I have something to prove, like I'll tell you how busy I am and how much I do day to day. But I think it's because the question of how do I spend my time, how should I be spending my time, is one that's constantly on all our minds. We want to know how to prioritize, how to make decisions in a way that's healthy, good for our families, and ultimately to live our lives in a way that makes us good people. We put so much time and energy into figuring out what it means to be a good Jew. What's the right thing to do? What's the right way to live? For thousands of years, we've turned to our rabbis and to our texts with questions about the foods we eat, the prayers we say, what happens if we find a piece of clothing on the ground and there's an argument about who it belongs to? Our Torah portion this week gets at some of these questions. Parshat Mishpatim, which introduced 53 commandments, answers definitively the questions, how should we act and how should we spend our time? And more importantly, it gets at the core question of what does it mean to be Jewish and how can I be a good Jew? Do you want to know the answer? Love the enthusiasm. V'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu, kol almana v'yatom lo te'anun. The stranger, the widow, the orphan among you, do not harm them. The commandment to not oppress the stranger appears no fewer than 36 times throughout the Torah. Nechama Leibowitz points out that no other mitzvah, not even the commandments to love God, keep Shabbat, or observe kashrut, are mentioned as many times. Not only that, but the injunction against oppressing the stranger is communicated both in positive language, thou shalt love the stranger, and negative, thou shalt not oppress the stranger. V'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu, kol almana v'yatom lo te'anun. Do not harm the stranger, the widow, the orphan among you. Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg explains that these 3 seemingly specific categories are the Bible's way of recognizing all marginalized people. Those disenfranchised and disempowered because of their gender or marital status, or because they are at-risk youth, because they're immigrants or socially marginalized in some other way. Everyone must be included, cared for, empowered, and their rights must be protected. And this is not just something we should do in our spare time, something we should think about when we have an hour available here or there. This is the commandment that's mentioned more than any other commandment in our entire Torah. When people ask us what it means to be Jewish, we ought to be answering that it means advocating, learning, working for and with the people around us to build an equitable, just, loving world for all people. When we think about what it means to be a Jew, we ought to think about standing with those who have fewer rights or less access to the resources and care they need. This is why, again, this year, Bethel is participating in what is known as Repro Shabbat. Repro Shabbat happens over Parshat Mishpatim each year and is a chance to continue the important ongoing conversation about reproductive rights in America and in Judaism. This weekend, Jewish communities across the country are attending classes, hosting guest scholars, volunteering, and hearing sermons, all centered on the topic of abortion access and reproductive justice. It's a reminder through our Jewish lens that the world we are trying to build of justice, equity, safety, health for all will never be realized until everyone has autonomy over their bodies and the right to choose when and whether or not to have a baby. Today's Parsha, Mishpatim, opened with the basis for this conversation. We first learned that the penalty for killing another person is death. Makeh ish vamet mot yumat. One who fatally strikes another party should be put to death. But 3 verses later, the penalty for causing a pregnancy to end, causing a miscarriage, is not death. When men fight, the Torah relates, and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be subject to monetary fines. And it goes on to explain how to collect the fine. So while killing a person brings the penalty of death, we can see that an unborn baby is not, for this purpose, in this case, considered a person, and one who causes its death is liable only for monetary fines. At the end of the day, this is Judaism's stance traditionally on abortion and reproductive rights, that an unborn baby does not have the same rights as the parent carrying it. This thread continues throughout Jewish literature, and it's interesting also to note that our tradition does not get bogged down into details like how many weeks, what is a trimester, does the fetus have little toes yet? The Talmud in Masechet Arachin takes up this question of what to do when a pregnant person is at risk because of the fetus, and it responds Pshita, Gufahi. It's simple, it's her body. That's the conversation in 3 words. Thousands of years of rabbinic commentary and halakha, and pages upon pages of ink have sought to make the point that a pregnant person takes precedence over the baby they're carrying. There are times, like if the pregnant person's life is at risk, where terminating the pregnancy is not only allowed but required by Jewish law. But in other times, if a pregnant person's life is not at risk, abortion is still permitted. Mishpatei Uziel, a collection of responsa, by Rabbi Ben Zion Chai Uziel Paskind, or gave a halachic ruling that abortion is not permitted without reason, but for a reason, even if it's a slim reason, such as to prevent shame or disgrace, then we have precedent and authority to permit it. Throughout history, our rabbis have worked to widen the criteria to say you need a reason, but let's work so that we can find that reason. Now, this sermon is not meant to be a survey of all the religious texts on reproductive justice. My plan is not to stand here to teach a class on what each one of our sources says about abortion. If you're interested in that class, let me know, but that's not what we're doing right now. You're welcome to read these and many other ancient and contemporary texts and sources on reproductive justice in the packet that's outside, on the cart, as well as in the Kesher email that went out before Shabbat. Instead, I want to get at the underlying values our tradition is trying to communicate. We may start with the question, what does Judaism say about abortion? But we'll end up learning the answer to what does it mean to be Jewish? Or how can I be a good Jew? This week, like so often in our community, our youth led the way in our learning. The teens in the Heschel Society spent last week learning about reproductive rights and abortion access, and we volunteered on Wednesday evening at the National Council of Jewish Women, making aftercare kits for a local clinic. We learned that there are many people who, as if they haven't been through enough just getting to the point of an abortion, don't have the things they need to stay healthy and comfortable afterwards. And the number of people to whom that applies is only going to go up in our country. When constitutional protections of abortion access fell, many states, as we know, enacted bans, which made this already fraught process even more difficult and dangerous, putting people seeking abortions at an even higher risk. These bans affect everyone everywhere, but will particularly, as I said earlier, affect populations that are already vulnerable. Here in Minnesota, progress has been made, much progress has been made this past year. There's much more to do to repeal unnecessary restrictions and obstacles between pregnant people and the care they need. It's easy to think, oh, we're better than our neighbors, and look at those other states over there. But we can't use that as a reason to disengage from the important conversation, to stop pushing and challenging the abortion restrictions that do exist here. And so for 2 hours, we were at the NCJW office learning about their important contributions to our community. And then we, the Heschel Society, put together over 150 of these kits. And in those moments, I realized that this is the avodah, this is the work. This is what it means. When we talk about living Jewishly, or when we talk about being a good Jew, this is what we're talking about. So often when people ask me about my religious practice, I tell them about the ingredients we do and don't bring into our kitchen. Or that we light candles every Friday night and then don't touch the light switches until sundown Saturday. I talk about how often I pray, how many hours I spend in the synagogue. But none of those mitzvot, no mitzvot at all, are brought up, are repeated, are mentioned over and over as many times as v'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu. The stranger, the orphan, the widow, the marginalized and disempowered, the vulnerable one. Lift them up. Do not harm them. Last week, our ancestors left Egypt, where they were avadim, where they were slaves. At Mount Sinai, they entered covenant with God and became Avdei Hashem, servants of Hashem. As Am Yisrael, as the Israelite people, undergoes the process of defining itself, asking, who are we and what do we stand for? God comes in and says, you stand for empathy. Your work is to call on your experience, the good, your experiences, the good and also the challenging, also the painful. To sit with the people on the margins and say, I see you and I hear you. Today, Parshat Mishpatim teaches us what that means. What is our avodah, our work, and our service? To be Avdei Hashem means advocating for those who need it most, using our voices to raise up those who have been silenced, recognizing that every person deserves the right to make decisions about their own body, family, and life. This is the work. So on this Shabbat, we remember that we are a people that stands for Kavod Habriot, human dignity, a people that celebrates reproductive freedom, which includes the right to have a child and the right to not have a child, and every human's right to bodily autonomy. Let us remember the oppressed and the vulnerable and heed their cries, and let us be role models of empathy to the world around us. Shabbat Shalom. We'll continue with Musaf, page 155.